From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon. As promised, I'm Patrick Anderson. I review books for the Post, and all of us at the Post are very proud to be part of this event and very grateful to all of you for being here over the years. It's a pleasure to introduce our next speaker, a prolific novelist who is best known for his prize-winning tales of horror, Peter Straub. Mr. Straub was born in Milwaukee, the son of a salesman and a nurse. He was struck by a car when he was 7 and hospitalized for several months, an experience that gave him an early understanding of the random dangers and perhaps the horrors of this world. His father wanted him to become an athlete. His mother thought he should be a doctor or a minister, but he found out he loved books and decided to be a writer, which he did. Mr. Straub has published more than 20 novels. The fifth, Ghost Story, in 1959, brought him national and international fame. 79, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I wrote one in 59. 79. His other novels include Coco, Hellfire, Mr. X, his most recent, A Dark Matter, and 2 collaborations with Stephen King, The Talisman and The Black House. There are rumors of an upcoming 3rd collaboration with Mr. King, which perhaps he will tell us about. It's a pleasure to present Peter Straub.
Thank you. It's nice to see you all here. No matter who you came to see, it's great to see you. Anyhow, it's a great group. I see, the very, very terrific writers. It's a pleasure just to look at Martha Grimes. The instructions we had were not to read, and from our work, that is. No? Yes. We're kind of guided in that direction. And we're told really just to kind of speak in an informal way about ourselves. So believe me, that is actually absolutely what I intend to do. The bit my kind introducer gave you is from my website, and I never intended that to stand as a general introduction to my life, though it is very accurate. My father did expect me, for as long as possible, he held to the belief that it was possible for me to be an athlete. He looked at me and he saw a Green Bay Packer, He always did have a very rich fantasy life, my father. My mother knew that I had zero interest in football, and all she wanted desperately was that I would somehow turn out to be a good person, There were so many little clues as though maybe I might not be absolutely good, that when I married this wonderful woman I'm married to and I settled in, I actually had a kind of a career for myself. She was really relieved. And actually, I'd gone on through schools in the nicest, most regular possible fashion. But there was always this question when I was a kid of what I would be good for, or good at. I always did really well in school, and I always really, really loved reading. And my parents got really behind that. My parents read to me immensely when I was a child. I remember being on their laps and them, pointing at the comic strips in newspapers, the Sunday comics, and going through those, reading books to me out loud. And that must have fed into the real hunger that I had to read as a small child. I remember the immense frustration. What I did experience is the immense frustration of not being able to read. I remember pointing at street signs and saying, "What does that say?" And they'd say the word A-U-E-R, and they'd say hour. And I'd say, hour? Like an hour on a clock? Like our house? It didn't make any sense. I did the same with billboards. Say, what does that say? And very kindly, as sweetly as possible, they always read these things to me, to the point where they read the same comic books to me over and over and over, so that I had them memorized. And then I pretended to read these comic books to other children, to my friends. And one day the most miraculous thing happened to me. I was about 5 years old. I was looking along, pretending to read, and I realized that I was reading. That I was reading the words, I was speaking the words that were right in front of me, and by that time I'd said them so often that I could recognize them. So, there I was, launched. I wanted very much, I couldn't wait to go to school, because I thought surely in school, it's where they just give you book after book after book, and you read better and better books as you go along, and then you read more and more interesting stuff. So I went along and I went to kindergarten, and I was really bummed, because in kindergarten what they mainly had us do was take construction paper and little baby scissors and cut out things like elephants. And I remember going home and telling my mother I just hated it. There wasn't any point. I'd never have to cut out elephants in my real life. I didn't like doing it. I wanted to read books, so I read them at home. I got to first grade, and I thought, okay, now this. At last, we're going to have some relief here. They're going to get real books, and we did. But the books we got were Dick and Jane. Do anybody here remember? Great books, weren't they? Thrilling plots, amazing style. What killed me, I think I probably spent a lot of time being really angry as a kid, but it was because of stuff like this. I'd look up Dick and Jane, which we were told to read in school, and I'd open them and say, it's Run, Dick, Run. And then there's See, Spot, Run. And the next page was the page that really killed me. There was a picture of Spot the dog running, and it said, See, see, see. And I thought, nobody ever said that. That's the dumbest, most insulting thing I've ever seen in my life. And fortunately, I discovered the school library. And then I was off. And every school I went to, I ripped through that library like it was the gateway to heaven, which of course it was. There's a description that Charles Dickens wrote of himself in middle life about his childhood. And remember, Dickens had a very unhappy, because he was Charles Dickens, it was a very unhappy childhood. For someone else, it might have been a very ordinary, almost satisfying childhood. His father did go to debtor's prison, but when he went to debtor's prison, your whole family moved in with you. You ordered meals out. A lot of conversation. There wasn't any work to do. You just languished there until somebody managed to get enough money so you pay your debts and then you got out. But what killed Dickens was that because he knew himself to be something other than the perfectly ordinary product of Victorian London, what killed him was he had to leave school or wasn't allowed to go there, and he was put to work in a blacking factory where they made like shoe polish. Warren's Blacking. It really hurt him and it really made him. But he in midlife, he was talking about this era in his life, and he spoke of himself of getting home from the blacking factory and reading as if for life, reading to save his life. I think when I read that, I felt this recognition, not that I'm comparing myself to Dickens, but I certainly recognized that impulse and that mood and that kind of rapture. There's no doubt that I read to learn about the world. I read to learn about what adults were actually up to. But I also read to escape, so I could go somewhere else, somewhere where I would be led along through a series of episodes into scenes, into ballrooms and dining rooms and living rooms, and on ships and through jungles, all that sort of thing. It was still not clear. It was clear I was very good at that, and I was also good at talking about books. But what was that good for? It seemed really that my only hope for a successful adult life was to go to graduate school and become an English professor, which didn't sound so bad to me. And when I got to college, I noticed I liked English professors, and I thought they were cool. they were different from the science people. They were different from the business people. They were, I guess it just occurred to me what I really liked was that it was evident that they had inner lives, that inside themselves, inside those people were different worlds, very well inhabited, well upholstered, and interesting. I love that. So I did, I majored in English. I went to graduate school at Columbia. I got an MA. Then I ran out of money. I wanted to get married. So I married, thank God, the right person. And I taught at my old boys' school for 3 years until we made enough money. And then we made our big break. And we moved from Milwaukee to Ireland, where I was a graduate student at UCD, University College, Dublin. A great place. Ireland itself was a great place. Dublin was a great place. This was 1969. The minute we got off our crappy student boat, which was called the MS Aurelia, the only ship of the Cottager Line. If you ever sign up for an ocean crossing and you see the boat belongs to the Cottager Line, I advise you to look elsewhere. It was dandy if you were 20, but otherwise not. Anyhow, we fell into a world that didn't exist in Milwaukee, or if it did, it was not accessible to us. It would have existed in New York, but it would not have been accessible to us. It was a world composed of painters and poets and writers of other kinds, of sculptors, this intense hive of people all working very, very busily away at making art as though it were the most natural thing in the world. One problem with my childhood was that it was implicit in it that if you called yourself an artist, you were by virtue of that insanely self-deluded and self-important and ridiculous, you know. He calls himself an artist. You know, my father thought that was just like the worst thing you could do. Anyhow, here we were, these people who are just, who were rooted in their own talents. This was extraordinarily helpful to me. I was writing a lot of poetry with which I was obsessed. And I published a good deal of poetry in Ireland. And I worked away at my thesis, but it wasn't any good, my dissertation. And when I brought 200 pages of it, my dissertation advisor, a wonderful scholar and a brilliant man named Dennis Donahue, who's still with us. Dennis Donahue took about 3 weeks, and he called me into his office and he said, "Mr. Straub, this work has no connection with the subject you said you were going to write about. And also, I must say, although it's very well written, it's written like a book. It's not written like a dissertation. This won't do. You have to go back and," I thought, oh boy, that's it. Now, fortunately, I must have been really arrogant to think I could convince Dennis Donahue that my 200 pages about Anthony Trollope were really about D.H. Lawrence, which is what I told him I'd write about. But I couldn't fool him. So what I did was I took out from my desk a novel that I'd written the previous summer. I had written this novel because, although I was deeply interested in poetry, I also had always had, and you'll understand, I could not really mention this to my parents, because they would have taken it as a sign of self-delusion and self-aggrandizement. I had always really secretly thought of myself as a novelist. And it seemed to me that novels represented a sort of territory that I half understood. They represented a kind of version of home territory for me. I could not have expressed this to my parents. I could barely express it to anybody because I didn't exactly know what I meant. But that is very much what I felt. So one summer, instead of writing yet more doomed words about Anthony Trollope, I wrote a novel according to the Graham Greene principle that I read about In The End of the Affair, the narrator of the end of the affair is a novelist named Maurice Bendrix, excuse me. Maurice Bendrix says, writing a novel is easy. You just write 500 words a day, drip, drip, drip. And at the end of the year, you have a novel. I thought, well, I'm going to learn. I'm going to take Graham Greene at his word. And I went off the same place where I did my doomed work on Trollope and the National Library of Dublin. And I brought along bound notebooks, that is, account books, as it were, with lined, numbered pages. And I wrote until I figured I had about 500 words, and then I counted them to make sure I had at least 500 words. If I had 550, I'd say, oh, that was a good day. If I was having a real good day, I might write 600, but then I thought, no, I don't get to count that extra 100 for tomorrow's work. It doesn't take very long to write 500 words. Anyhow, I did this, and I got to the end of a novel in like 6 months, and I didn't know what to do with it. So I typed it up, and I salted it away, thinking there might be something there and there might not be. When Dennis Donahue lowered the boom on me, I asked a friend of mine, I asked a person I knew, he wasn't even a friend, if I could send the book to his publisher. The publisher I liked because they published John Updike, a novelist with whom I was at that time more or less in love. And I mailed it off, and they took it, thereby saving my life or resolving my doubts about my own future. The funny thing about this book, which is called Marriages, over there are the signing sections. I must have signed 6 copies of this book. It was published in 1973 in an edition, in the American edition of maybe 2,000. At least half of those went to libraries. The other half should have disappeared, but some people had them, some people read. One person even told me they liked it. This was a novel in which I was following my nose, but into the deepest fog. I had no idea how really to do what I most wanted to do. So this is my system, apart from the 500 words a day. I thought, because I love the work of the poet John Ashbery, I thought I could write a novel that would be the equivalent of an Ashbery poem. I thought narrative was old-fashioned and old hat and obsolete. I wanted to write a book of glittering fragments all lined up, and that would make its effects through sort of associational poetry. I wasn't that good. But what I did was I wrote a kind of conventional imitation of Fitzgerald, let's say. A very good model if you want to steal from somebody or want to imitate somebody. You can't do better than that style. It had one exciting part in which a guy seated at a cafe table in the south of France sees a man from his hometown walking down the main street of this little town, Arles. And he's riveted because he knows actually that man is dead. That man was a neighbor of his, but who was killed in prison after having shot another man in their hometown. So he says to his girlfriend, I'm sorry, it's very interesting, but I have to follow that guy. The most interesting part of that book had to do with the narrator of the novel Marriages following this man he knows to be dead down a long, long, long spooky road into the amphitheater at Arles, then into the amphitheater and into a little blind alley, into a little room carved out from the stone on the inside of the amphitheater, where he doesn't see the man at all. There's just a piece of paper with some enigmatic words on it. Now, I should have known from that that my directions in life would be more narrative, that I wanted to be more about story, about mystery, about matters like that. And before long they were. I see I had less than 10 minutes now to go. And if you want any questions, we have about 4 or 5 minutes. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer. If you don't, you don't. But I'll give you time.
talk about your future collaboration with Stephen King?
Oh, sure. Had I more time, I would have spoken endlessly about Stephen King. Who's a fascinating, brilliant guy. He, back when we were both largely unknown, and had published just like 2 books, Steve King was sent my first supernatural book, a ghost story called, a sort of Henry Jamesy type ghost story called Julia. And he wrote a wonderful blurb for it, different from all the other blurbs, in that he showed he actually understood what I was about. Then a year and a half later, when I published another book, he wrote a 2-page letter to my publisher that showed absolutely he understood what I was talking about. So I went into a bookstore in London. I bought a book by him. It was called Salem's Lot. It was first being published. I had no idea what it was about, and it blew me off my chair. It was so good. So I wrote him. He wrote me. We lived in London at the time. The Kings moved to England. We got together. Steve and I liked each other very much. The only problem with being with Steve King is that he talked so much, and he talked so fast, and he said so much, and he had so much energy. It was a little tiring sometimes. Anyhow, about a week after we'd gotten to know each other, he said to me, "Look, we could have some fun if we write a book together. Let's do that." And I said, "Sure, let's do it. I agree." And we looked at our schedules, and we saw that we couldn't begin the work for another 4 years. This is because he owed 4 books, and I owed 2. This is the difference in our methods. But anyhow, 4 years later, we got together. We'd, by that time, already worked out quite a program for our book, and we launched it together, and we finished it together. A very rare experience for any novelist, to work side by side with another one, especially another one who was loved. It was a great, great experience, and we continue to be friends. Yes?
I'm actually a very dedicated horror and mystery novel reader.
Yeah.
The thing is, I want to know. I forget. Oh, right.
Good.
I want a suggestion of what to read next, because I learned about you through Stephen King and Peter Straub book
okay.
collections. I want a little bit.
You know what?
Yeah, I know.
There's a very good writer named John Langan who wrote a knockout novel. It's like a really, really brilliant literary horror novel called House of Windows.
Actually, I mean one of your
one of my
solo.
books.
Yeah.
Oh, I would read Mystery. It's not a horror story at all, but it's got all the feelings. It's a very complex novel. It's a novel about a very complex crime that touches the characters of the people who are involved in it, and it's an odd book, but I'm very, very pleased with it. I think I did something different and kind of new there, and I recommend it very highly.
All right, I'll try and find it.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Peter. Long time no see. You didn't talk about your love affair with jazz, however.
No,
Which was a big piece that you
do we
left.
have another hour?
Yes,
Or
we
another week?
Can you talk about the genesis of your ideas? I mean, how are these born?
Mostly, to the extent that I have ideas, they begin with a kind of lousy little idea that could come from the stock pot of any novelist. Oh, somebody's missing and his friends have to go find him. I wrote a novel that started that way. It's called Coco, and it's one of my best books. What happens is a long process of stewing and evolution in which I think about it for a long time. I eventually think about all the characters for a good time, and I set off on a little road that goes somewhere I suppose that I know of, though in fact I don't. Almost always the little road takes me elsewhere, and the story changes. Whatever is underneath the story finally comes up. At a certain point in almost every book, after I've been working on it for about a year, I say to myself, oh, that's why I wanted to write this book. You know, I recognize something that has been on my mind, some deep inner matter that's one of my 2 or 3 themes, you know, that I keep returning to, and always surprise me anew. It's a real evolutionary process. Sure.
Hi, you are who I came to see today.
Oh, thank you.
I've been a fan of yours for years. The Talisman is one of my favorite books of all time.
Oh,
I've
thanks.
probably read it 20 or 30 times.
Oh, wow.
And
Fabulous.
I read it and I try to figure out what part you wrote, what part Stephen King wrote, and I can't figure it out. How do you write like that?
It's very. There are some people who can do that. The only one I know who's really infallible is Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman once startled me by proving that he knew who wrote what in our books. But Steve and I, in A Talisman especially, did a dirty trick on everybody. At certain points, we imitated each other's styles.
Oh, no fair.
And that made it fun.
Yeah.
Also, if Steve put in jazz allusions
Okay.
to make people think I wrote that, and then I wrote in allusions to the kind of rock and roll I knew he likes.
Okay.
Because we didn't want people to know who wrote what. We didn't want people to divide the book up. The only really funny thing that ever happened was that somebody on one of those reviewer sites long before Amazon wrote that they knew which parts I wrote because the parts I wrote sucked. So he said, so every time I came to a part that sucked, I know that Peter wrote that.
None of that book sucked. It's my favorite book. Thank you very much.
Thanks. That's about it. Thank you very much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.